Bonsoir pour cette dernière session.
So this is our very last session of our Manifesto of Anthropocene. We started this morning at 9:30 a.m. and the last but not least session of today. So as we're already used to it, we start with the message of the manifesto. We have entered the Anthropocene. We are the Anthropocene. We are Earth's community. We are living together through climate change, the acidification of the oceans, rising sea levels, extinction of species, pandemics, famines, soil pollution, wildfires, migration, floods, drought, widespread urbanization, social inequality. The list is infinite. We no longer control our impact. Everything around us is shifting, and whether we like it or not, we are exploring our own lives and environments anew. What do we want to express from our close environments through our daily practices, our lives? What offends our moral conscience and our sense of justice? What makes us angry or happy? What are our ideas? And how do we intend to change the situation? Do we feel like Earthlings? Let's speak up, give our opinion, and engage in dialogue. That's why we try and gather in order to highlight some territories for the 12th session of this Manifesto of Anthropocene. So we will work with Mexico, Canada, the United States of America, Cuba, Ecuador, Colombia, Jamaica, Haiti, Panama, Peru, Belize, Costa Rica, El Salvador, Polynesia, Guatemala, Panama, and Nicaragua. As the previous sessions, we will first of all watch video clips, and then we will start a debate with some of our guests, panelists, and the audience. So, without further ado, the video clips. I'm 22 years old. J'ai 22 ans et je crois que j'ai entendu parler du changement climatique. D3R, séparez vos ordures, prenez soin de vos déchets, ne jetez pas vos ordures dans la rue, depuis aussi longtemps que je me souviens. Enfin, depuis toute petite. Enfin, je suis une petite fille. Je me souviens que c'était pas important pour moi. Je m'en suis jamais assez soucié pour réaliser de quoi il s'agissait. Et ce n'est qu'en 2019, c'est-à-dire il y a 2 ans, que j'ai commencé à voir qu'il y avait beaucoup d'informations qui faisaient référence au changement climatique, aux inondations, aux ouragans, aux incendies. Et même dans ma propre ville, et ça se produisait de plus en plus fréquemment, et que d'une manière ou d'une autre, ces événements étaient liés au changement climatique, ils étaient liés à nous-mêmes, ils étaient liés à mes actions quotidiennes et au système économique dans lequel nous vivons. Mais ce n'est que lorsque j'ai décidé de m'y intéresser que j'ai réalisé que ce n'est pas seulement un problème environnemental, c'est pas seulement les forêts qui brûlent, c'est pas seulement des espèces animales qui meurent, qui s'éteignent, mais il y a aussi des gens qui meurent à cause de tout ça. Il y a des gens qui payent à cause de ce que nous faisons, nous les humains, depuis des centaines d'années. Et pas tant que ça, finalement, déjà simplement après la révolution industrielle, et je trouve ça scandaleux. Je trouve ça horrible que moi, une personne qui a des privilèges, je puisse vivre dans cette maison, par exemple, et ignorer tout ce qui se passe à l'extérieur. Et pas seulement moi, mais beaucoup de gens. Je trouve scandaleux qu'on ne considère pas le changement climatique comme un problème social et qu'on ne perçoive pas tout ça comme la crise que c'est. C'est horrible, c'est vraiment scandaleux. Alors la seule chose à faire, c'est C'est résister. Résister et faire partie d'une révolution à partir de chez nous et dans la rue. Bonjour. J'espère que vous allez bien, que vos familles vont bien dans cette crise. Je suis mexicaine et je vais vous parler de l'Anthropocène. Au cours des 200 dernières années, il y a eu un impact si fort dans l'environnement que nous avons éprouvé le besoin de créer une nouvelle ère, l'ère de l'impact de l'être humain sur la Terre. Des moyens de production basés sur des combustibles fossiles, une consommation non durable, l'augmentation de la population, un système social politique injuste. Ce sont quelques exemples que ce qui s'est passé dernièrement suite à l'impact de l'activité humaine. Jamais une époque n'a été aussi marquée par l'action d'une seule espèce. C'est la raison pour laquelle que nous parlons aujourd'hui de nous, les êtres humains. Mais comment on peut se rendre compte que nous vivons l'Anthropocène? Il suffit simplement de regarder l'environnement. Le réchauffement climatique, l'augmentation de phénomènes météo extrêmes, l'acidification des océans, la perte de biodiversité. Mais qu'est-ce que ça signifie vraiment qu'être un être humain sur la Terre? Quelles sont nos responsabilités dans cette époque marquée par nos propres actions? Il faut changer radicalement la manière dont nous nous percevons depuis des siècles. C'est-à-dire que nous ne sommes pas les seuls êtres vivants qui importent. La biodiversité, faune et flore sur cette planète ont droit de vivre. Arrêtons d'être arrogants, anthropocentristes et ne cherchons pas à ne satisfaire que nos propres besoins. Il faut nous préoccuper de la manière dont nous allons laisser la Terre pour les générations à venir. Il faut de l'eau, il faut des forêts, des mers. L'Anthropocène marque le début d'une nouvelle ère. Mais l'impact que nous générons est notre responsabilité actuelle. C'est de notre ressort de laisser la Terre à nos générations futures. Il ne faut pas en finir avec la vie. Il faut choisir de faire une pause, de trouver de nouvelles solutions, d'arrêter d'utiliser les carburants fossiles et utiliser des sources d'énergie durables, être responsable dans l'utilisation des ressources, de nouveaux systèmes sociaux, politiques, économiques justes, responsables. Et c'est ainsi que nous allons pouvoir avoir un système durable et éviter que l'Anthropocène soit la dernière ère que connaisse notre planète. Et ici, la responsabilité qu'est être un être humain sur la Terre. Merci de m'avoir écouté.
L'an 3000.
This is the year 3000. Earth, in 1 billion years, did what we've done in a very short time.
Où la nature expose en un genre de clair-obscur son or à qui stridule. Homme cigale ayant chanté, cultivant le futur sur brûlis d'éternelles canicules. Les fruits passent la promesse des fleurs, les incendies libèrent des communes dans les livres de religions en feu, l'animal humain coule comme une essence à cocktail Molotov. Consumés, les braises nous rendront le noir et blanc du texte, les ombres câlineront les souvenirs brûlés à l'improviste. Laisse l'émeute au slogan claironné sur le parvis que nous vitriolâmes. 10 siècles, rebattus comme des cartes de tarot aux coins émoussés. Parmi elles, j'en retourne une et la regarde. Un esclave, aux lèvres mousseuses, qui pend à une branche et qui signifie qu'avant de disparaître pour de bon, notre planète observera enfin quelques rosaces, des soleils mécaniques en orbite qui l'illumineront d'un délectable vertige ischémique. Succédant à la religion globale de l'argent, l'artiste roi, jusqu'alors minoritaire après l'irréversible faillite des ultimes pendollars, triomphera. Les vagues de chaleur, plus 25 degrés en moyenne, précipitant une bien opportune catastrophe. La culture artistique, dans l'hyper-jungle sibéro-bretonne allant de Brest jusqu'à Vladivostok, imposera son credo à ces peuples d'avoir gaspillé leurs ressources à l'agonie. Durable, éco-responsable, peu consommatrice d'huile ou de gaz, l'empire artistique, EA, aura Mozart, Homère, Beethoven, Baudelaire, Shakespeare, Picasso, Dante, Schubert, Vinci, Chopin, Coltrane, Caravage, Plath, Say, Bach, Lee, Liszt, Lou, Holtz, Doux, Pound, Björk, pour Dieu, et pour devise, sois sauvage. La population mondiale, 100 000 habitants, sera répartie dans ce qui demeurera des anciennes villes squattes cernées par la jungle épaisse, surpeuplées de fruits, gibier, cueillis, chassés. Chacun sera artiste pour un tiers du temps, devant dédier un autre tiers aux 3 travaux communs, santé, cuisine, éducation, et un ultime tiers à la fabrication instrumentique. Et puis, tel ce vieil homme fatigué qui, se retournant sur son existence, juge y trouver une belle futaie, que toute nouvelle graine, excitée vaniteusement, rendrait embrouillée comme un massif de buissons sclérophiles poussés en l'absence du coryphée de jardin, n'imposant pas de concept, actualisant une harmonie possible, et digne, descend, à petits petons, sur l'escalier menant à ce royaume où patientait sa morte. Sans confier les clés à telle espèce d'animaux, même s'il le faisait, la nature fière aurait tôt fait de ruiner l'héritier choisi au profit d'un plus sauvage. Hommes et femmes se regrouperont au sommet de falaises rouges que lécheront du dernier soleil les premières flammes, et se prendront la main, et sauteront.
De forts témoignages qui sont venus s'associer.
So very moving testimonies, adding up to all the other ones we've heard today. Sharon's, for instance, about the fact the way she lives in Guadalajara, Mexico, the Anthropocene and the relationship we've got between our daily lives, personal actions and the territories. We're also very lucky to have 3 people with us for this very last session, Ajin in the USA, Vincent Mirza in Canada, and Cristian Simonetti in Chile. So, Cristian, let's start with you in order to follow up the previous session. I think we haven't spoken when we were speaking with our friends from Venezuela, Argentina, and Brazil, is that you've already worked on a manifesto of Anthropocene. Can you let us know a little bit more about that?
Can you hear me? Oui.
Yes.
Hola.
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Can see you. You can see me now.
Super.
Something that I think is moving for me in relation to the big effort you're doing, which is a remarkable effort, I think, is how for the future generations I have to teach, for the young children I have to raise, there seems to be no future ahead, and how we can accommodate a future for that young generation. And I think that's related to the question of what is to compose a world, a common world, and to have a manifesto, world manifesto for the Anthropocene. And I think somewhat that is contrary, and it's an impossibility in relation to the very diagnosis of the Anthropocene. We know of the Anthropocene because there are various instruments teams of researchers, all scattered around the world, connecting, of course, a global phenomena. The same happens with climate change, ocean acidification, mass extinction. But somewhat, the moment we get to that image of the globe, we lose what it is to feel immersed in an environment that can have room for a future that you can breathe, that you can feel. Well, most of the phenomena that's related to the Anthropocene, it's phenomena that no one has ever touched, like, for instance, climate. No one has ever seen climate to the eyes of climatologists. Of course, we are immersed in the daily variations of the weather, but the climate, it's a phenomena that's only accessible to the long-term records of the science. And in that image of the phenomena we are dealing with, of course, there is no room for a future we can all engage with, and that we can feel, and of course to which we can contribute. And I feel that's something that's is a real struggle for the young generations, because they are somewhat paralyzed. At least my students, or my children, they feel somewhat paralyzed with all that's happening, with the diagnosis of the phenomena. How do we build a future common to all the inhabitants of this world, heterogeneous enough to accommodate all the diversity that it's in there, but also sensible? And I think there is something to say now, looking at the drawings, there is something to say about the arts and the relevance of the arts. We need to make that future sensible. We need to make that common world sensible to people, so that you can somewhat experience it beyond the diagnosis. You know, it's very important in this image. I'm trying to convey that the phenomenon of the Anthropocene is very much tied to the emergence of a planetary discourse, to the capacity of humans to see the world from afar. Actually, the very scientists whose research gave birth to all this reflection were immersed in imaginations that conceived the planet as one more entity within all the elements that are circulating in the universe. They were actually working in NASA. They had this planetary view of the Earth. But in becoming experts on this global phenomena, somewhat we lose what it is to feel the world in a specific locations. And I think this is the impossible task a manifesto like this is trying to achieve. And although it's impossible, I think it's worth pursuing. You have to do it no matter what. And of course, it will be always imperfect. And of course, it has to be always ongoing. It has to be an unfinished manifesto. And for that, I do definitely sign for.
Merci Cristian pour votre enthousiasme.
Thanks a lot, Cristian, for your enthusiasm and the fact that you accept this task that is a never-ending one, that will never be concluded, but maybe this is because this is the reason for which it is a rich and interesting endeavor. You are in Denver, in Colorado, and I think you're very familiar with the Anthropocene, but are you still with us? Apparently not. So, Vincent, you're here. This is also something you know very much, and the Urban School of Lyon is also something you're very familiar with. So you are speaking from Ottawa in Canada. Good evening, Vincent. Good afternoon. So please introduce yourself and tell us about what you do. So my name is Vincent Mirza. I'm an anthropologist, and I teach urban Anthropocene at the university. It's a collaboration between the University of Ottawa and the one of Lyon. So we try and find ideas to change the situation. I think that teaching at the university is a good way to gather together researchers, artists, and people from different communities with different backgrounds in order to think over the Anthropocene issues. And beyond this teaching, there is an academic research and the intention of opening up of encouraging people to study this issue. It's also a political stance, the need to think together, maybe not to create a new field, but to create a new space, a pluridisciplinary space for thinking over the Anthropocene issue. So, very often people say that the academic world has almost no impact in reality, but we'll try and have an impact. So after listening to all the guests, when I think of Anthropocene, I think of that things are speeding up, but at the same time slowing down. The huge acceleration of the 50s, the development of capitalism is, of course, culminating with the end of the biophysical systems and climate change. But at the same time, it is the possibility to see the impacts on the planet, the impact of the Western modernity and industrial capitalism. So I always think of the way things speed up. And there's a kind of reflex in me trying to find a solution to stop it. And of course, with these pandemics, we can see a massive slowdown, and apparently many things have come to a halt. And it could be time to rethink a slower world. A lot of people said that for the first lockdown, it was the opportunity to rethink our relationship with the world. But I think that we missed the opportunity to do so because as soon as we could, we produced again as much as we had done. And at the end of the day, the COVID crisis is a climate crisis. And when this crisis is over, the climate crisis will go on. And that's the challenge for us. And maybe a very last point, because I know that I'm very talkative. I find very interesting the idea of giving the right means, the possibility for the students to act, because very often when we speak with students, they feel powerless faced with the Anthropocene problem. So I think we could have tools at their disposal in order for them to participate and to be able to act on their environment.
Merci, Vincent.
Thanks a lot, Vincent. So, shall I take advantage of what you've said in order to make a link between what Cristian is worried about what to do with the young generation, and what we do with students and the perspective you've just spoken about? Maybe I'm being a bit lyrical, but a kind of university that would be more involved, that would act more. I mean, acting and learning at the same time? Yes, a kind of university that thinks of how to mobilize knowledge in other ways than the classic model of disciplinary production. The way we used to work, or we used to study in the 20th century, the Anthropocene generally tells us that what we did during the 20th century was not the right way to do things. So, art, politics, all different ways of showing the world through diversity. Indigenous people, also indigenous communities, are as good as scientific studies and give us also another way of thinking the world. I think it's also interesting that we have Akin from Colorado University. Anne, are you here with us? Hello, Anne? No, you're not here with us? We still have technical issues. So she appears and she disappears apparently. Yes, there must be a technical issue because each time we try to get in touch with her, she's disconnected. Okay, Cristian is still here. And Vincent. I would. So let's give back the floor to Cristian to listen to what he can say about university, about learning and building new dynamics through university. Cristian, are you still with us? No. No. Disconnected, apparently. Oh, no, he's connected. So let's wait for a couple of seconds. It would be nice to have two guests.
Are you asking for me?
Oh. Yes, Cristian, we were... I don't know, have you had the opportunity to listen to Vincent when he spoke about the university and movement? Because he's teaching a new field. So he's aiming at giving space to a new kind of knowledge. And maybe that was connected with what you said at the beginning, that is to say, how to speak with our students, how to speak with the new generation in order for them to act.
Do you get any translation, Cristian?
Can you hear the interpreter, Cristian?
Apologies, my connection is a bit unstable. Can you hear me?
Yes, we do.
Yes, we can hear you, Cristian. The interpreter is speaking.
Yes,
you're asking how I go about with my students working on these issues. Is that correct?
Oui. Plus ou moins, mais ça...
Yes, more or less, but it's okay, it's okay. You can go on.
All right. All right, apologies, my connection it's awful, so I can't hear properly the questions. But if I understand correctly, well, to me it's a struggle. How do we build a common planetary world, a planet that it's heterogeneous, that you can feel it everywhere, knowing that our landscapes are heterogeneous, The air we breathe, it's heterogeneous. Well, there are many carbons now studied. So climate change, in a way, is heterogeneous. So how do we engage with that? And one of the ways I've been working with students it's through a material I've been doing research with is concrete. Well, concrete is one of the candidates to mark the onset of the Anthropocene. And it's the most abundant anthropic rock produced in human history. And of course, only a handful of people know about concrete. Well, this is just one example. People don't know how to mix concrete. Only a handful of people know. Although it's the most abundant material we have ever produced to build our housing, and is, as I say, a candidate to mark the stratigraphic onset of the Anthropocene. Because we have produced and consumed so much concrete that we now have a thin. We could grab all the concrete and cover the entire planet with a thin layer of concrete. And who knows about concrete? Well, mostly people who work in the building sector, mostly men. And what I've been doing, I've been putting people to mix concrete, to engage in the trajectories of concrete, and to sort of reflect on how they inhabit the world from the place of this material, not just the finished surface that most people inhabit as they get to occupy the urban landscape, but actually making it. And of course there is a paradox in all this exercise, because concrete is a very pollutant material. But anyway, we are somewhat in the Western world desensibilized of what it is to feel in different environments. We don't hunt our food, we don't collect our food, and of course we inhabit this particular surface it's sort of the consummation of a particular narrative in the Western imagination that separates the earth from the sky. We have divided material and spiritual dimensions in this surface, no, the ground, where matter, hard stuff is down below, and spiritual stuff is floating above. No, it's the consummation of the dualisms that mark the Western imagination and modernity as well. That somewhat are responsible for all that's happening with the Anthropocene, in which we define ourselves as exceptional in evolution. And of course, when you are in an urban space like Santiago, you feel modern. When you go to the south and connect with the wood, or you go to the north in Chile and connect with the mud in rural areas, you somewhat return to nature. Standing on concrete is an experience of feeling modern. But at the moment you start engaging with the properties of material and their trajectories, of course that image starts sort of melting in a way, because you realize all the cooking that it's involved in it, and all the craft that plays in the actual making of the material. So that's just one example of how. But to me, and I think it's related in relation to what I was saying earlier, to me the key to make this happen, to make a world manifesto, to envisage something more than just having justice, to diagnosing the phenomena and sort of signaling who is responsible, in order to build a common future that has room for people, for all the people of the world, in all the heterogeneous sort of landscapes and forms of culture, etc., requires an approach to that planetary view that is sensible, that it's felt. And that to me is an impossibility, because to know the Anthropocene is to stop feeling. To know the Anthropocene is to divorce yourself from everyday experience of an environment. Like to know climate. To know climate is not to know weather. They are opposite terms. So how do we build a common understanding of global warming that it's weather-like? And that's, to me, is an impossibility. And well, I think that's the impossibility this manifesto should try to achieve. Although it will be, as I said, always unfinished.
Oui, comme vous l'avez.
I hope that's an answer.
Comme vous l'aviez dit aussi auparavant, hein, c'est un manifeste.
And as you were saying, it's a manifestation of a movement. And I'm always very impressed by the research you can do into this idea of materiality, the loss of connections that can be a consequence of various things. I also was thinking about the causes, and sometimes I enjoy talking about the Three Little Pigs syndrome. I don't know if you know this story of the Three Little Pigs. These Three Little Pigs build a house, build houses, and they could say, well, we're going to build our house out of concrete because they want to be safer. They want to protect themselves from the wolves or anything else. And as our colleagues in Switzerland, in Lausanne, say about the guaranteed city, we want so many guarantees that we succeed in separating ourselves from the most essential things, which you mentioned, the essence of things. How do we move away from these guarantees to find more sensory links, more sensory connections, which could be a solution to the problematic of the Anthropocene?
Apologies, I lost you there for a moment. Can you please repeat again?
So the Three Little Pigs. How do you move away from the guarantees previously we tried to seek to find new ways of connecting to the... So maybe Pierre could speak, who is next to me instead, who wanted to add a few points. And if you reconnect in a way that allows you to hear us, I will reformulate my question and you will be able to answer. So I'm going to allow Pierre to speak. Good evening, everyone. So I found this idea very interesting, this idea of projecting into an alternative future. There is, I would say there's no future that is not particularly desirable for many of us, for most of us, but some people are working actively to build a future that is unpleasant, mostly. And what I find interesting in this idea of a global manifesto for the Anthropocene is this projection into the future, this collective projection towards the future, and this construction of an alternative. So this is only the beginning, obviously. But this reclaiming of these themes beyond the academic and university spheres, what this reminds me of is what Souleymane Bachardin, the philosopher, said. He's a Senegalese philosopher, I think. It's what he calls a universalism of translation. And I think it's interesting to say that if we imagine ourselves as a species, there's a way in which we reclaim the idea of universalism in a different way, and to reclaim the future of our species in a natural environment through ultimately this universality of our destiny. And this idea of the Global Manifesto seems to agree with this idea of a collective discussion, this constant, continuous process which will allow us to reclaim the construction of this future together. Thank you, Pierre. This leads us to the final minutes of this manifesto. We would like to invite other people who are with us here in Lyon, for example, Jérémy and Laure, if you would like to come and join us, and possibly also you, Vincent, on the question of the global Anthropocene manifesto, having a common dynamic across nations, and the importance of doing so, and doing something which is a moving process to try and continue to not only promote the manifesto as an object, but as a dynamic. What do you think of this, Vincent? I think it's a very positive project. But I think, like Cristian, the real question is around representations, on the possibility to represent alternatives, to conceive them, to accept that there might be very diverse possibilities, that they can be imagined in different contexts, in different ways, that there doesn't have to be just one alternative, even if the problems are common ones. And I think that's one thing. The second point is that we need to think about how we can represent all the issues that the Anthropocene raises. And when I talk about the feeling of impotence of the students, it comes from the fact that they feel submerged by the scope of the issues. So returning to more comprehensible, more easily understandable issues on a particularly understandable scale is to, when examining capitalism, we need to find ways of growing differently and growing our economies differently and redesigning our connections and our relationships. The manifesto is something that offers a voice to many, many people and many different ways of thinking around these issues.
Merci.
Thank you very much, Jérémy.
Cristian, on vous entend.
Yes, go.
I was just thinking of concrete again. It's amazing how concrete it's this promise of homogeneity, that you can erase all the particularities of what it is to live heterogeneously in this world. When you buy a flat, you hope that it will be just pristine and perfect, no? Orthogonal surfaces, orthogonal forms, and perfectly flat surfaces. And of course, this conversation here is a demonstration that the world we inhabit it's different. Of course, I'm in a local, as I mentioned earlier, I'm in a local rural place. I had to travel outside of Santiago, and my connection is poor at the moment. And all the peoples that are being gathered in this manifesto have their own trajectories, and they're all diverse. And in order for that to happen, we have to break that surface of homogeneous living. That's the promise of modernity. How do we break that surface and make that sort of heterogeneous growing of trajectories happen? It's a real struggle, because that very image of an homogeneous surface is at the core of the Anthropocene. The Anthropocene, it's only possible to the eyes of stratigraphers, at least those leading the Anthropocene working group, is possible only through the identification of a isochronous surface around the world, like the one we envision if we had to gather all the concrete of the world and we had to put it in one thin layer around the surface of the globe. So in order to create a world manifesto for the Anthropocene, we have to break the Anthropocene somewhat. We have to dismantle it. We have to make it grow in a heterogeneous way. We have to be anti-anthropocenic in a certain way, if that makes sense.
Cristian, Jérémy, qui du coup va en profiter pour te répondre et poser finalement peut-être cette question, parce qu'il nous reste 7 minutes et du coup je me relève un peu, sinon ça va être compliqué pour moi. Je voudrais juste peut-être profiter de cette occasion.
So I'd just like to answer these points and to take this opportunity to discuss the title of the Global Manifesto of the Anthropocene. It's just as if you had suggested that we should have a global manifesto which counters the Anthropocene, which tries to break or sabotage the Anthropocene. I'm not sure what kind of idea you propose, but in any case, a global manifesto against the Anthropocene could points towards the next stages, the future, where we try and move against the Anthropocene. And generally speaking, what has just been talked about are the values that lie behind all this, the values we're going to use to build something else. Does the word value, if you translate it into different languages or we translate it through our own language, how would you define the word value? And what are the values you might add behind this? There are too many values. They are hard to identify. They are difficult to put into words. It's like waste. It's like many different words that don't have specific definitions. A waste can't be defined easily. It can be a car. It can be someone who drinks too much. A waste can be plastic. It can be metal. It can be concrete. Despite it being a construction material. So while there's a lot of work to do in defining all of these notions together, but being able to talk through the tool that Cristian has used, i.e. the metaphor, using the idea of concrete as something that separates us and separates us from our world, and all the ways in which it's a way of describing what we are trying to really define. But when we talk about breaking this layer of concrete to find our relationship with the planet, with ourselves, with each other, it's something we need to break something to be able to move forward. Even though the future is uncertain, we have to break through somewhere to break through to get to the future. So if anyone wants to speak, say something else about this, I have a few words I could say. I think not only should we break certainties, we need to break the way in which we have acquired these certainties. In other words, we have to rethink the way in which we have set up a compartmentalization of disciplines, disciplines that allow us to understand the world and try and rebuild the relationships and the links between the disciplines to try and face up to the need to break away and to break through the concrete, which was a metaphor Cristian used, but also to deal with heterogeneity in different ways and to find solutions.
Cristian, vous êtes encore avec nous?
Cristian, are you still with us? Would you like to add something?
There is something to say on the other side, I think, from those who prize heterogeneity. I was thinking of the comments that were made earlier. It's remarkable that we have a planet right there in the studio. It's very much about that in a way, that the possibility of seeing the planet from afar. But what is to see it from within? I think social scientists and humanities scholars, particularly anthropologists, also need to change in a way, because we are very, very good at pricing heterogeneity, at looking at the particularities of what it is to inhabit that planet. And in doing so, we have sort of cast aside the possibility of a dialogue between people. The more we emphasize relativity or radical alterity, which it's sort of a fashion nowadays in anthropology, radical alterity, that there are certain people who are so different that they can't really talk to all the rest of the planet, then of course there is no solution for a common manifesto. So it has to be really in between. I don't have a solution to this. It has to be homogeneous, heterogeneous. It has to be global, local. It's of course you can create so many terms for this, and there have been so many variations of it in academia, and I think it's an open question. A question, of course, is not asked to us to us to solve or for us to solve. It's a question that will remain open. I believe, and I think it's also the task of a manifesto of this sort. A manifesto of this sort not only needs to manifest something; it has to create a common world that it's as I say, planetary, but also haptic. That you can feel it, in your guts, that you can engage with it, that you can breathe in and out. And that to me has to occur outside in a real world, or well, of course it can occur through this media, but it has to also go outside, and it has to engage all the disciplines. And of course, for that, the disciplines need to transform themselves as well, including the disciplines and Vincent, of course, comes from anthropology, I believe.
Oui, absolument. Absolument, et je pense que, d'abord, je pense qu'il faut inviter.
Yes, absolutely. I think we need to invite Cristian into Canada to come and speak to us. But I think also we need absolutely to be able to move away from the reflexes we have built up in our own disciplines, and to move away from the habits we have through the initiatives you have taken through this manifesto. It forces us to think about our relationship with the disciplines anew. Thank you very much for taking part in this final session, session 12 of the Global Manifesto for the Anthropocene, which began at 10 o'clock this morning French time and which is about to end. We are very happy to have been able to do this all day, to have spoken to so many guests, to have worked with the team at the École Urbaine, Octopus, Jérémy, for helping us throughout the day. You're going to have a well-deserved rest after crossing the globe from north to south, east to west, and to have communicated with so many people. I would like you to say a few words to conclude. You will have the last word in the last few seconds that remain. Vincent, thank you for your participation, for your work. It's been very interesting to speak to you. Cristian, also, thank you for everything you have brought and your energy to the debate. And we have thought about... yeah, it's a great project, and congratulations. It's very late where you are. Congratulations, your project is magnificent. So it's the 30th of January. The manifesto is now complete.